Hey guys, welcome back to another mind-blowing historical adventure that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about Atlantis, ancient civilizations, and whether Plato was actually describing a real catastrophe that destroyed the most advanced Bronze Age society in the Mediterranean. Tonight we're traveling back to 1600 BCE, to the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, where you'll experience the last 48 hours before one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in human history literally tears the island apart and possibly inspires the legend of Atlantis that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. Before we dive into this apocalyptic journey where you'll witness paradise becoming hell in less than 2 days, smash that like button if you've ever wondered whether Atlantis was real or just a philosophical metaphor Plato invented. Subscribe for more time-traveling chaos that explores actual historical catastrophes that inspired legendary myths, and drop a comment telling me, if you knew a volcanic eruption would destroy everything in 48 hours, would you try to warn people, or just try to escape and save yourself? Because after tonight's story, you'll understand why the Atlantis legend persists, and why the truth might be even more terrifying than the myth. Now get comfortable, maybe dim the lights to set the mood for ancient Mediterranean paradise about to become underwater grave. And let's discover what really happens when an entire advanced civilization gets only 48 hours of warning before nature erases them from existence. Opening your eyes to ancient Mediterranean perfection, your eyes flutter open to the most breathtakingly beautiful sight you've ever witnessed. You're lying on a terrace overlooking a perfect crescent bay, surrounded by whitewashed buildings with architectural features that seem impossibly advanced for the Bronze Age. The morning sun reflects off the brilliant blue Aegean Sea below, and the air smells of salt, fresh bread and flowers you can't identify but which fill the warm Mediterranean breeze with intoxicating fragrance. You sit up slowly, completely disoriented by the transition from your modern bed to this ancient paradise. You're wearing clothing that feels like linen, a simple tunic that's surprisingly comfortable and well made, with decorative elements suggesting wealth and status. Your hands look the same but somehow different, tanned from Mediterranean sun, calloused in unfamiliar places, adorned with jewelry made from materials you can't immediately identify but which gleam with craftsmanship that seems too sophisticated for what you assume must be primitive ancient time. The terrace you're on is part of a multi-story building with architectural features that will eventually influence Greek classical architecture. Columns, frescoes, sophisticated drainage systems, and construction techniques that demonstrate engineering knowledge far beyond what most people imagine Bronze Age civilizations possess. The walls are decorated with elaborate frescoes showing marine life, athletic competitions, religious ceremonies, and daily life scenes painted with artistic skill and vibrant colors that have somehow survived in your time as archaeological treasure. Below your terrace, the city cascades down the cliff face toward the harbor where ships from across the Mediterranean are docked. Egyptian vessels, Minoan trading ships, mysterious foreign boats from civilizations you can't identify. The harbor is protected by the crescent shape of the island, creating one of the safest anchorages in the ancient world. And in the center of it all, rising from the bay, is the volcanic cone that you immediately recognize with horror because you know what's coming. Your modern knowledge identifies this place instantly. This is Thera, the island that will become Santorini after one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history literally blows it apart. This is the Minoan civilization at its absolute peak, the most advanced culture in the Bronze Age Mediterranean, possibly the inspiration for Plato's Atlantis story. And you're here just 48 hours before everything you're seeing will be destroyed so completely that future generations will debate whether this advanced civilization ever truly existed. But the most stunning realization hits you like a physical blow. You somehow understand the language being spoken around you, a language that died 3,600 years ago and remains undeciphered in your own time. First realization, you're living in the Atlantis legend. A young woman, possibly your sister or wife in this reality, emerges from the building's interior and speaks to you in what you somehow recognize as Linear A, the still undeciphered Minoan script and language that archaeologists in your time have never successfully translated. But here, in 1600 BCE, the language flows from her mouth naturally, and horrifyingly, you understand every word even though you shouldn't be able to comprehend a language that died thousands of years ago. She's asking why you're up so early, mentioning something about today's religious festival, referring to preparations that need completing, and commenting on the unusual warmth of the morning. Her tone is casual, affectionate, completely unaware that she has less than 48 hours to live, unless you can somehow convince her and everyone else to evacuate the island immediately. The weight of your knowledge crushes down on you, Everyone you see, everyone going about their morning routines, is doomed, unless you can change history. You try to respond, but the words that come out are in linear A, flowing from your mouth in a language your modern brain doesn't know, but which your Bronze Age vocal cords produce effortless. The linguistic miracle suggests that whatever has transported you here has also given you the language, but not the cultural knowledge or understanding of what's about to happen. You can communicate, but you don't know the social protocols, the religious beliefs, the political structures, or any of the contextual information that would help you warn people effectively. Looking out at the peaceful bay, you notice things that terrify you with their significance. The water level is slightly lower than it should be, exposing rocks near the harbour that are usually submerged. There's a slight sulphur smell mixing with the pleasant morning scents, so faint that ancient people wouldn't recognise it as danger, but which your modern knowledge identifies as volcanic gas emission. The birds seem agitated, flying in unusual patterns, and the normally abundant sea life near the surface is mysteriously absent. These are the warning signs that geologists recognize as precursors to major volcanic eruptions. The volcano is building pressure, the magma chamber is swelling, gases are escaping through vents and cracks, and animals with sensitivity to geological changes are responding to signals that humans can't directly perceive. In your time, these signs would trigger evacuations and volcanic warning. Here in 1600 BCE, they're minor anomalies that people notice but don't understand, lacking the scientific framework to interpret them as symptoms of impending catastrophe. And then the first tremor hits, so subtle that only you recognize it for what it truly is. Meeting your Minoan family in doomed paradise. The building sways slightly, just a minor movement that makes pottery on shelves rattle briefly before settling back to stillness. The young woman laughs it off, mentioning that the gods seem restless today, making a casual comment about earth tremors being common on the island, and nothing to worry about. Her lack of concern is both culturally appropriate. Minoans live with minor earthquakes regularly, and interpret them through religious rather than geological frameworks, and tragically fatal because she doesn't understand that this tremor is different. A warning of the catastrophic eruption building beneath her feet. An older woman, clearly your mother or aunt based on how she addresses you, calls from inside about morning preparation. You step into the interior of the building and are immediately struck by the wealth and sophistication on display. Elaborate frescoes covering walls with scenes of bull leaping, maritime expeditions, religious ceremonies, and nature imagery painted with artistic skill that won't be matched in the Mediterranean for centuries. The furniture shows expert craftsmanship with inlays of precious materials and designs that demonstrate aesthetic sensibility far beyond what most people imagine Bronze Age peoples possess. The household clearly belongs to elite class. The size of the building, the quality of decorations, the expensive imported goods visible on shelves and in storage areas all indicate significant wealth and social status. You might be a merchant, priest, government official, or member of the ruling class. Your position in this society gives you potential influence and access that could help in warning people, but it also means you have social responsibilities and expected behaviors that you know nothing about. The older woman asks about your responsibilities for today's festival, something involving religious duties, administrative tasks, or ceremonial roles that you're apparently supposed to perform. She mentions names of people you should know, references events, and relationships you have no memory of, and assumes you understand protocols and expectations that are completely foreign to you. Your blank stare and confused silence make her concerned, reaching out to touch your forehead as if checking for fever while muttering about whether you've been touched by divine madness. Other family members emerge, children who look at you with expectation and affection, servants or household staff who await instructions, perhaps a spouse who approaches with casual intimacy that makes you uncomfortable because you don't know who this person is to you. Everyone has established relationships with you, memories of shared experiences, expectations about your behavior and knowledge, and you have none of that context, making every interaction a minefield of potential mistake. You try to deflect attention by claiming you don't feel well, that you had disturbing dreams, that something feels wrong today. All true statements that you hope will excuse your strange behavior while also potentially laying groundwork for warning people about the coming disaster. But your family interprets your concerns through their religious worldview, suggesting you might have received prophetic visions from the gods, recommending you consult with priests or perform purification ritual, treating your modern geological concerns as spiritual messages that need religious interpretation rather than scientific action. And outside, the city of Akrotiri is beginning its final normal day before the world ends. Understanding where and when you actually are. Over the next few hours, As you navigate the difficult task of pretending to know what you're doing while desperately trying to gather information, you piece together the reality of where and when you've landed. This is Theron approximately 1600 BCE, during the late Minoan IA period. At the absolute peak of Minoan civilization's power and cultural achievement, the Minoans control trade across the eastern Mediterranean, have colonies and trading posts from Egypt to Anatolia, and represent the most advanced culture of the Bronze Age Mediterranean world. The island of Thera itself is crucial. Its strategic location makes it a perfect trading hub. Its fertile volcanic soil supports productive agriculture, and its culture reflects the sophisticated artistic, religious and social developments of the Minoan world. The settlement of Akrotiri, where you're apparently living, is one of the most important cities outside Crete, demonstrating the wealth and power that Minoan civilization has achieved through maritime dominance and trade networks stretching across the known world. Your modern knowledge reveals the terrible irony. This civilization has built its paradise directly on top of one of the most dangerous volcanoes in human history. The volcanic soil that makes agriculture so productive, the protected harbor formed by previous eruption, the very geography that makes Thera so desirable is the result of volcanic forces currently building toward an eruption estimated at volcanic explosivity index 7, equivalent to hundreds of nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. To the Minoans, volcanic activity is the domain of deities. Earth tremors are gods moving beneath the ground. Sulfur smells are divine breath. Volcanic eruptions are expressions of divine anger or cosmic conflict. They have religious rituals for appeasing earth-shaking gods, protective symbols and ceremonies meant to guard against disaster, and spiritual frameworks for understanding natural phenomena that don't include plate tectonics or magma chambers. Your attempts to explain geological processes will be filtered through their religious worldview, making warnings difficult. The sophistication of Minoan culture makes the coming catastrophe even more tragic. These aren't primitive people who will lose little when disaster strikes, but rather an advanced civilization with accumulated knowledge, artistic achievements, engineering capabilities and cultural developments that won't be matched in the Mediterranean for centuries. The linear A script you're speaking, the artistic traditions visible around you, the architectural knowledge that built this city, all will be lost or severely disrupted when the volcano destroys the heart of Minoan civilization. And the signs of impending disaster are becoming more obvious with each passing hour, but only you can recognize them for what they truly are. The wealth and splendor about to be destroyed. As you explore Akrotiri under pretense of going about daily business, you're struck by wealth and sophistication visible everywhere. The buildings are multi-story structures with sophisticated architectural features, ashlar masonry, complex floor plans, advanced drainage and sanitation systems, large windows with light wells, and construction techniques demonstrating engineering knowledge far beyond what most imagined Bronze Age builders possessed. The art is everywhere, and spectacular. Frescoes covering walls with vivid colors depicting dolphins, swallows, antelopes, boxing matches, religious ceremonies, exotic landscape, and daily life painted with naturalistic detail and artistic skill that won't be seen again in Mediterranean until classical Greek and Roman times. The pottery shows beautiful crafting with elegant shapes and sophisticated decorative patterns. The jewelry visible on people and in household displays shows expert metalworking with gold, silver and precious stones. Public spaces reveal even more, religious shrines with elaborate decorations and symbols, public buildings that might be administrative centers, warehouses storing trade goods from across the Mediterranean, workshops where skilled craftsmen produce pottery, jewelry, textiles and other goods for local use and export. The entire city demonstrates organization, specialization and wealth that only comes from successful long-distance trade and sophisticated economic system. The harbor area is particularly impressive, sophisticated port facilities with stone quays, warehouses for storing trade goods, areas for ship repair and construction, and cosmopolitan bustle of a major trading center. You see ships from Egypt with distinctive designs, vessels from Levant, Greek mainland boats, and Minoan ships dominating Mediterranean trade. Merchants negotiate deals, sailors load and unload cargo, officials presumably collect taxes or manage trade regulation. The trade goods visible give sense of Minoan economic reach: Egyptian scarabs and pottery, Levantine wine and oil, copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, possibly Afghanistan, via complex trade routes, luxury goods like ivory and precious stone, and Minoan exports including high-quality pottery, textiles and crafted items valued across Mediterranean. This is globalized Bronze Age economy in miniature, with Thera as crucial node. But geological processes don't care about human achievement or economic prosperity, and the volcano beneath this paradise is following its inevitable timeline toward eruption. Joel, Minoan culture crash course in your final hours. The religious ceremony your family mentioned becomes mandatory as morning progresses. Apparently you have some role in rituals honoring earth-shaking deities, which seems bitterly ironic given what's come. The ceremony takes place in shrine decorated with sacred symbols, the double-axe labris, representations of bulls and bullhorns, complex geometric patterns seemingly having astronomical or mathematical significance, and depictions of sacred Minoan goddess or goddess. Priests and priestesses perform elaborate rituals involving offerings, chants, ceremonial actions you're expected to participate in but don't understand, and invocations to deities whose names and attributes you can barely follow. The religious framework seems to involve earth goddesses or gods, divine bulls possibly related to earthquakes given association between bull bellowing and earth tremors, snake goddesses, and complex theological concepts about cosmic order, renewal, and relationship between human and divine realms. Your expected participation requires performing actions and speaking words you don't know. You fumble through it, trying to follow others' lead while hoping your incompetence is attributed to illness or divine distraction rather than complete ignorance. Other participants seem concerned by your awkward performance, whispering among themselves about whether you've been touched by divine madness or spiritual pollution, debating whether additional purification rituals are needed. The social hierarchy is visible. There are clearly priest kings or queens, noble classes, wealthy merchants and officials, skilled craftsmen, agricultural workers and what might be slaves or servants at bottom. Minoans seem less rigidly hierarchical than later Greek societies or contemporary Egyptian civilization, with religious authority perhaps more important than pure political or military power, but definite class distinctions affect access to resources, political influence and social status. Gender relations seem surprisingly egalitarian compared to later patriarchal Mediterranean societies. Women hold significant religious roles, participate in public ceremonies, appear in frescoes as active participants in sports and ritual, and generally seem to have social status and autonomy that Greek and Roman women won't enjoy. Prominence of goddess imagery and female religious functionaries suggests Minoan religion might be centered on feminine divine power in ways that will be suppressed in later culture. And then another tremor hits, stronger this time, making people pause and look around nervously as the earth beneath paradise begins its final deadly dance.
Trying to warn people who don't understand volcanoes. The second tremor is strong enough that everyone notices. Pottery falls from shelves and shatters. Buildings sway noticeably. A few roof tiles slide off and break on streets below, and people stumble or grab for support. This isn't minor movement from earlier that could be dismissed. This is clear earthquake forcing everyone to acknowledge something happening beneath their feet. The crowd in religious ceremony breaks into anxious chatter, with people looking to priests and officials for interpretation and reassurance. The priests respond with religious explanations. The earth-shaking god is restless, perhaps angered by some ritual violation or human failing, requiring additional offerings and ceremonies to appease divine wrath. They're not wrong that something powerful is restless beneath Earth, but their framework for understanding doesn't include magma chambers, tectonic pressure, or volcanic eruptions. They're trying to solve geological problem with religious solutions, and while intentions are good, methods are completely inadequate for actual threat. You try to explain, speaking urgently about mountain exploding, about needing to evacuate island immediately, about disaster coming that will destroy everything if people don't leave now. But your words are filtered through their worldview and language. When you say mountain will explode, they hear it as metaphorical or divine language about gods emerging, or cosmic conflict. When you say fire and rock will rain from sky, they interpret it as poetic description of divine punishment, not literal prediction of pyroclastic flows and volcanic ash fall. The priests are actually listening. Your obvious distress and passionate warnings, combined with tremor that just occurred, makes them take you seriously as someone possibly touched by divine vision or prophetic madness. They ask questions trying to understand your warnings. Which god is angry? What offerings are needed? What rituals should be performed? They're engaging with your message but transforming it into their religious framework, looking for spiritual solutions to what you know is physical, geological threat. No amount of prayer or sacrifice can prevent. You try different approaches, describing physical destruction without religious language, drawing on ground to show how mountain will blow apart, using hands to demonstrate violence of eruption,
attempting to find words in linear A that convey explosive force and total devastation. Some people seem to understand you're predicting major catastrophe, but they still don't grasp urgency or need to evacuate immediately, rather than performing protective rituals and hoping divine favor will save them. Few people are actually convinced. Some elderly individuals mention their grandparents spoke of major eruptions on other islands. Some sailors have seen volcanic islands in other parts of Mediterranean and understand that mountains can indeed explode violently. The practical nightmare of Bronze Age evacuation. Even people who believe your warnings face overwhelming practical obstacles to evacuation. Where would 15,000, 20,000 people go on short notice? Ships in harbor can't carry everyone, and most people don't own boats anyway. Neighboring islands and mainland areas aren't prepared to receive massive refugee influx. Most people's entire wealth is tied up in property, stored goods and local businesses they can't easily pack up and transport. Social organization that normally makes city function smoothly becomes obstacle to rapid evacuation. Decisions require consensus among leaders. Religious authorities need to consult omens and perform rituals before major actions. Family obligations mean people won't leave without relative, and general bureaucracy of Bronze Age civilization isn't designed for emergency response. You're asking people to make decisions in hours that normally would take days or weeks of deliberation, planning and preparation. Your own family illustrates the problem. Your mother or aunt refuses to leave household shrine with its sacred objects and family treasures accumulated over generations. Your sister or wife wants to wait for relatives currently traveling. Your children are frightened and confused by talk of disaster, making travel difficult. Servants and household staff look to you for leadership but also have their own families and obligations elsewhere in city. Everyone has reasons why immediate evacuation is impossible or needs to be delayed. Officials controlling ships and harbor facilities are debating what to do. Some are convinced by warning signs and want to load ships immediately and leave. Others think reaction is premature and fear losing trade opportunities if they abandon port unnecessarily, and still others are waiting for religious authorities to provide divine guidance before making decisions. Bureaucratic paralysis is fatal. Every hour of debate is hour closer to eruption, and window for successful evacuation is closing while people argue about right course of action. You try different tactics, appealing to priests' religious authority by claiming gods sent you visions of destruction, convincing merchants by warning about loss of goods and trade if they stay, frightening parents by describing what will happen to their children if they don't leave, and offering to take responsibility if your warnings prove false. Some people respond to some approaches, but there's no unified evacuation effort, just scattered individuals and families making their own decisions about whether to stay or flee. And then the third tremor hits, the strongest yet, causing visible damage to buildings and finally breaking through the denial that has kept people paralyzed by normalcy. When ancient science meets modern geological knowledge, this tremor is terrifying. Buildings crack audibly, some walls collapse partially or completely. People are thrown to ground, an entire city seems to shift and settle unevenly. Screams fill air as injuries occur and people panic, running into streets in fear. Earthquake lasts longer than previous tremors, perhaps 30-40 seconds of violent shaking, making standing impossible and causing widespread structural damage to sophisticated but earthquake-vulnerable multi-story building. In aftermath, city is in chaos. Injured people need help. Damaged buildings are dangerous. Fires have started in some areas where pottery lamps were knocked over, and general panic makes organized response difficult. But amidst chaos, more people are taking your warnings serious. Physical evidence of escalating seismic activity, combined with your passionate predictions, is finally breaking through denial and bureaucratic paralysis. People are beginning to load ships, gather essential possessions, and prepare for evacuation even if they don't fully understand why. Priests are performing emergency rituals trying to appease earth-shaking deity, but even they are hedging bets by moving sacred objects to ships and preparing to evacuate religious treasures along with civilian population. Pragmatic recognition that ritual alone might not be sufficient is finally taking hold, driven by visceral experience of violent earth movement that can't be ignored or rationalized away. You realize with horror that you don't actually know exactly when main eruption will occur. Your modern knowledge tells you major Theron eruption happened around 1600 BCE with devastating effects, but you don't know precise timeline. Was it hours, days, or weeks from first warning signs to cataclysmic main eruption? Geological evidence from your time shows eruption sequence involved multiple phases, but exact duration isn't preserved in rock record with precision that would help you now. Minoan scholars and wise men are trying to apply their own knowledge to situation. They have accumulated observations about earthquakes, some understanding of volcanic
volcanic islands from other locations, and traditional knowledge about natural phenomena passed down through generations. They're not ignorant primitives, but rather people working with knowledge available to them, trying to predict and understand forces that won't be properly explained until modern geology develops thousands of years in future. And while people debate and prepare, the volcano is following its inevitable geological timeline toward eruption that will destroy everything in its path.
Loading ships while the island trembles. Evacuation is finally underway, but it's chaotic and incomplete. Some ships loading frantically while others remain tied at dock with crews debating whether to leave. Some families rushing to harbour with whatever possessions they can carry while others refuse to leave their homes. And general organisation far from orderly evacuation that modern emergency management would attempt. Bronze Age civilization simply doesn't have systems, communication infrastructure or disaster planning that would make mass evacuation efficient. You're helping load one of ships, carrying amphorae of wine and oil, helping families with children aboard, trying to pack as much food and water as possible for sea journey to uncertain destinations. Physical labour is exhausting in Mediterranean heat, made worse by volcanic gases making air increasingly difficult to breathe. Your lungs burn, muscles ache, and constant fear of imminent eruption makes every movement feel urgent and panicked. Ships themselves are impressive examples of Bronze Age naval technology, sturdy wooden vessels with both sails and oars, capable of carrying significant cargo and passengers across unpredictable Mediterranean. But there aren't enough of them, and ones available aren't designed for mass refugee transport. Commercial cargo ships being pressed into service for human evacuation, fishing boats that normally stay near shore being asked to make open water journeys, and general mismatch between available vessels and evacuation needs is painfully obvious. Some people still refuse to leave. Your elderly mother or aunt insists on staying with household shrine, convinced that gods will protect her if she maintains proper rituals and doesn't abandon sacred duty. Sibling with sick child, doesn't think child can survive sea voyage and chooses to take chances with staying rather than risk journey. Others are waiting for relatives who aren't yet accounted for, refusing to leave without knowing what happened to loved ones elsewhere in city. Emotional devastation of separating families is compounded by knowledge that this might be last time you see relatives who choose to stay. You're essentially watching people decide to die with their city rather than flee to uncertain futures as refugees, and cultural values that make those decisions logical within their worldview don't change tragic outcome. Minoan attachment to place, family, sacred duties, and accumulated possessions is directly contributing to deaths that could be prevented if people were willing to abandon everything and run. Your ship is nearly full, and Captain, grizzled Minoan sailor who's made this run hundreds of times, is insisting that ship needs to leave soon before sea conditions worsen or harbour becomes unusable. The heartbreaking choice, stay or go. The elderly aunt or mother you couldn't convince to leave is standing on dock, tears streaming down her face, reaching out toward ship but still refusing to board. She's made her choice, to stay with household shrine, family property, sacred duties she believes she can't abandon. Her faith in divine protection is absolute, and no amount of geological explanation or emotional pleading can overcome her religious convictions and cultural values about duty to gods and ancestors. Your sibling with sick child is there too, having made agonizing calculation that child probably won't survive sea voyage and choosing to stay in familiar home rather than die on ship. Medical realities of Bronze Age childhood illness, combined with harsh conditions of refugee flight, make this rational decision within their framework even though it's death sentence if eruption is as catastrophic as you know it will be. Other family members, neighbours, friends you've made during brief time here, all making individual choices about staying or fleeing based on their own circumstances, beliefs, and calculations of risk. Some are paralyzed by indecision, unable to choose between equally terrible options. Others are frantically trying to reach harbour but being blocked by crowds, damaged buildings or simple physical distance from port. Ship is pulling away from dock. Captain has decided that delay means danger, and that people aboard matter more than people still on shore who had their chances to evacuate and chose not to take them. Gap between ship and shore widens, making decision for you whether you wanted to choose or not. You're leaving, sailing away from doomed island, watching people you've come to care about recede into distance as ship catches wind and heads toward open water. Screaming and crying from shore is audible even as distance grows. People who suddenly realize they want to leave but can't. Families being separated possibly forever, general anguish of mass displacement and disaster. Sound will haunt you forever, even more than visual memory of city you're leaving behind. But you also realize that people on this ship aren't safe yet. Every minute of sailing puts bit more distance between ship and ground zero, but you don't know if it will be enough.
The race against eruption. Every minute counts. Ship is crowded with far more people than designed to carry. Refugees packed into every available space. Possessions crammed wherever they fit. Livestock and animals creating additional chaos in cramped conditions. Weight and distribution of load are making ships sit lower in water than is safe, reducing freeboard and making vessel vulnerable to swamping if waves get rough. Captain is obviously concerned but also recognizes that turning away refugees to improve safety margins would be morally impossible. Winds are favorable but not strong. Ship is making progress away from Thera but not as quickly as you'd like given what's coming. You keep looking back at island, watching volcanic smoke plume grow larger and darker, seeing additional venting sites open on flanks of volcano, and recognizing all signs that main eruption is approaching rapidly. Every minute of sailing puts bit more distance between ship and ground zero, but you don't know if it will be enough. Other ships are visible around you, some ahead, some behind, all fleeing island in various directions based on their captain's decisions about best destination. Evacuation fleet is scattered across sea, without any coordination or communication between vessels, each ship making independent choices about heading and speed. Bronze Age communication limitations mean there's no way to warn other ships if danger appears, no way to coordinate response to hazards, no central command directing refugee exodus. Sea surface has odd quality, not normal wave patterns you'd expect, but rather strange ripples and disturbances suggesting underwater activity. Ship is experiencing unusual currents affecting steering, and experienced sailors are muttering concerns about ocean feeling wrong in ways they can't quite articulate. You recognize these signs as indicating submarine volcanic activity, earthquake-induced disturbances, or other precursors to main eruption already affecting the sea. Ship's captain is pushing crew to row in addition to sailing. Every bit of speed matters now, and combination of wind and oars is moving vessel faster than either alone could manage. But physical exhaustion of crew, combined with overcrowding and challenging sea conditions, makes sustained rowing difficult. Pace isn't sustainable for long journeys, but captain is gambling that getting away from immediate danger zone quickly matters more than conserving crew strength for long voyage ahead. And on horizon behind you, the volcano is building toward its catastrophic finale that will change the Mediterranean world forever. The beginning of the end. Plinian column rising. Main eruption begins with sound, unlike anything in human experience. Roar so deep and powerful that it seems to shake very fabric of reality. Noise that you feel in bones and chest, as much as hear with ears. Looking back toward Thera from ship, you see volcanic cone essentially explode upward, with column of ash, rock and superheated gas rocketing into stratosphere at speeds approaching sound barrier. Plinian eruption column rises impossibly high, 20, 30, eventually perhaps 40 kilometers into atmosphere, punching through troposphere and into stratosphere, visible from hundreds of miles away as towering pillar of destruction. Column spreads at top, forming characteristic umbrella pine shape that Pliny Younger will describe when witnessing Vesuvius nearly 1700 years in future, creating mushroom cloud eerily similar to nuclear explosions that won't occur for over 3,000 years. Color of column is terrifying, dark grey to black at base where rock fragments and ash dominate, lighter toward top where steam and gases are more prominent, shot through with lightning as violent updrafts create enormous electrical charges that discharge in spectacular and deadly bolts. Lightning isn't beautiful, it's manifestation of incomprehensible energy being released, visible proof that forces beyond human control are tearing island apart. Sound arrives before physical effects because sound travels faster than eruption products initially. That terrible roar is your first warning, giving precious seconds or minutes to brace before shockwave hits. And then it does hit. Pressure wave traveling outward from eruption that buffets ship, snaps rigging and knocks people off their feet. Atmospheric disturbance creates wind from nowhere, changing direction chaotically as eruption draws air toward itself and then blasts it outward again. Sea responds to atmospheric and seismic disturbances. Waves appear from calm water, ship pitches and rolls violently, and sailors struggle to maintain control as normal maritime conditions are replaced by chaotic forces driven by eruption. Water is being pulled toward volcanic vent by enormous updraft, creating currents that fight against ships' attempts to sail away, adding to difficulty of escape. On Thera itself, visible in glimpses between ash and steam, you can see city of Akrotiri beginning to be buried under falling pumice and ash. Buildings you were living in hours ago are being crushed under accumulating volcanic material. Streets are filling with hot debris, and anyone still on island is experiencing hell on earth as rocks rain from sky and toxic gases fill air. People who stayed, including your family members, are dying right now.
and you can't help them, can only watch from ship as they disappear under volcanic destruction. But Plinian column, impressive and deadly as it is, isn't the most dangerous aspect of eruption. What comes next will be far worse. Pyroclastic flows. The true killers emerge. What terrifies you most is what you know is coming. Pyroclastic density currents. Superheated avalanches of gas, ash and rock fragments that will race down volcanoes' flanks at hundreds of kilometers per hour, destroying everything in their paths with temperatures of 200 to 700 degrees Celsius and hurricane-force winds carrying rock debris. And then you see them, pyroclastic flows emerging from collapsing eruption column as portions of rising material become too dense to remain airborne and cascade back down as ground-hugging currents of death. They look like boiling clouds racing across landscape, moving impossibly fast, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Flows don't stop at shoreline, they continue into sea, creating massive steam explosions as superheated rock meets cold water, generating additional tsunamis and atmospheric disturbances. Sight is apocalyptic in most literal sense. This is end of world for Minoan Thera, complete obliteration of everything on island. Buildings, people, animals, crops, ships in harbor, religious shrines, artistic treasures, all being consumed by forces that represent raw geological power of Earth's interior being unleashed on surface. Sophistication of Minoan civilization means nothing against pyroclastic density currents that don't distinguish between palaces and hovels, between masterworks of art and common pottery. Ship is still too close to island. Sailors are screaming warnings, trying to turn ship to present best angle to incoming waves and pressure fronts, preparing for impact with forces they don't understand but recognize as deadly. You grab onto rigging and brace yourself as first effects reach your position. Superheated steam from pyroclastic flows entering sea creates rolling wall of scalding mist that rushes across water surface. Temperature spikes dramatically even miles from shore, and air becomes thick with moisture that makes breathing difficult. Ship rocks violently as waves generated by pyroclastic flows hitting sea reach your position. Not true tsunamis yet, but rather local disturbances created by massive displacement of water as cubic kilometers of hot rock enter ocean. Some of other ships you could see earlier have disappeared, capsized, swamped or destroyed by same forces your ship is struggling against. Bronze Age naval technology is being tested beyond its design limits by conditions that no sailor has ever encountered and survived to describe. And then the ash begins to fall on ship, coating everything in grey powder that gets into eyes, noses, mouths and lungs. Ash fall and darkness. Day becomes night. Ash falling from eruption column reaches your ship's position. Not large pumice chunks that would sink vessel, but rather fine ash particles that rain down like dark snow, coating everything in grey powder that gets into eyes, noses, mouths and lungs. Breathing becomes difficult as ash content in air increases, each breath bringing volcanic particles into lungs where they can cause damage or suffocation. People are coughing, covering their faces with fabric, trying to create barriers against all-pervading ash. Visibility drops dramatically as ash concentration increases. What was clear Mediterranean day becomes twilight, and then darkness, as volcanic cloud blocks sun. Psychological impact is profound. People are terrified by unnatural darkness, interpreting it as signs of divine wrath or cosmic catastrophe, screaming and crying as familiar world disappears into volcanic night. Rational understanding that this is just suspended particulates blocking sunlight doesn't reduce primal fear of darkness arriving at midday. Ship's deck is accumulating ash rapidly. Weight of volcanic material is becoming concern as centimeters and then tens of centimeters of ash build up on every horizontal surface. Crew is desperately sweeping ash overboard, trying to keep weight manageable and prevent ship from becoming top-heavy or swamped. But ash keeps falling, seemingly endless, and physical labor of constant clearing is exhausting already tired crew. Major pyroclastic flows entering sea, combined with potential collapse of volcanic edifice itself, will generate tsunamis that will devastate coastlines across eastern Mediterranean. Waves might be tens of meters high when they strike shore, traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour across open ocean, carrying enough energy to destroy coastal cities and travel far inland. Crete, Greek mainland, Egypt, Levantine coast, all will be struck by tsunami waves that will kill thousands and contribute to disruption of Bronze Age civilization. Ship you're on is still too close to source. When tsunamis arrive, you'll be trying to survive waves in open water where wave height might be less extreme than at shore, but where conditions will still be deadly for heavily loaded Bronze Age vessels. Captain knows waves are coming but doesn't understand tsunami mechanics.
He's preparing for normal storm conditions, not for peculiar characteristics of seismically or volcanically generated waves. And then sea surface starts to recede, tsunami's trough arriving before crest in nature's cruelest warning.
The ocean drains away, nature's final warning. Water level around ship begins dropping visibly. Not normal wave motion, but rather sustained lowering of sea surface. As water is drawn toward approaching tsunami, ship settles lower as water recedes, keel touching bottom in places that should be deep ocean. And general wrongness of ocean's behavior triggers panic among sailors who've never seen anything like this before. Fish are flopping on exposed seabed, remains of ancient shipwrecks are briefly visible in areas where water has drained away completely, and general revelation of ocean floor creates surreal landscape that shouldn't exist. Some sailors want to abandon ship and walk on exposed seabed, not understanding that this is temporary and that water will return with devastating force. You have to physically restrain people from leaving ship, screaming explanations about coming wave that sound insane but which need to be believed if anyone is going to survive. Captain, to his credit, trusts your frantic warnings enough to keep people on board and to order preparations for massive wave impact. Rigging is secured, loose items are tied down or thrown overboard. People are instructed to hold on to fixed structures, and general emergency preparations are about as good as Bronze Age technology and knowledge allow. It won't be enough. You know forces involved are beyond what these preparations can fully protect against, but it's better than being completely unprepared. And then you see it, tsunami approaching as wall of water on horizon, ocean forming itself into moving mountain racing toward you at speeds that seem wrong for something so massive. Front of wave is steep and breaking, creating churning mass of foam and debris that carries destructive power of geological forces that created it. Behind leading edge, water surface is elevated for vast distance, representing enormous volume of water displaced by volcanic eruption and pyroclastic flows. Sound is overwhelming, roar of billions of tons of water moving at high speed, crashing and churning, destroying everything in path. Noise combines with ongoing volcanic eruption to create sonic landscape of apocalyptic destruction that makes verbal communication impossible. You can see people screaming but can't hear their voices over roar of natural forces that dwarf human experience. Ship rises as tsunami wave reaches it, lifted by approaching water like toy boat in bathtub, climbing front face of wave at angle that threatens to flip vessel backward, surviving the unsurvivable. Bronze Age versus geological fury. Ship has made it over first wave. Combination of Minoan naval engineering, captain's skill, crew's desperate efforts, and probably significant luck has allowed vessel to ride over tsunami crest without being flipped or swamped. But ordeal isn't over. Tsunamis come in series, multiple waves following first, and each subsequent wave is another chance for ship to be destroyed. Second wave arrives while ship is still recovering from first. Another massive elevation of sea surface that lifts vessel and threatens to overwhelm it with violence of breaking front. People who lost their grip during first wave and are in water have no chance. They're swept away by forces that make rescue impossible, disappearing into churning ocean to drown or be battered to death against floating debris. Your arms are burning from holding onto rigging with desperate strength. Fingers are cramping from death grip required to avoid being thrown overboard, and physical exhaustion is compounding terror as you realize you might not have strength to hold on through multiple additional waves. Around you others are experiencing same desperate fatigue. People are losing their grips and being swept away, children are being held by parents whose strength is failing, and general attrition is reducing ship's population with each wave. Between waves during brief relatively calmer periods, Captain is directing damage control, repairing broken rigging, clearing debris, redistributing weight to improve stability, and generally doing everything possible to keep vessels seaworthy for next wave. His leadership is keeping crew organized and focused, preventing complete breakdown into individual panic that would doom everyone. Bronze Age naval tradition that trained him for storms and emergencies is being applied to conditions far beyond normal experience, and remarkably it's working well enough to keep people alive. Third wave is actually smaller than first two. Tsunami energy is dissipating as it spreads across Mediterranean, and distance ship has traveled from Thera has reduced wave height at your location. This wave is survivable with less desperate effort, and realization that waves are decreasing provides hope that wasn't present during first impacts. Maybe ship will survive, maybe some people aboard will live through this, maybe escape from Thera is actually possible. Looking back toward island through breaks in ash cloud, you can see that Thera itself is collapsing into void left by evacuated magma chamber, the caldera formation creating the distinctive crescent shape that Santorini will have in your time. The caldera forms, island disappears into earth,
Most stunning and terrifying sight is what's happening to island itself. Center of Thera is falling into earth. Volcanic edifice is imploding as underground support is removed, and geography itself is being fundamentally altered by eruption. This is caldera formation. Collapse of volcano into empty magma chamber, creating distinctive crescent shape that Santorini will have in your time. Witnessing it in real time is beyond comprehension. Entire mountain, entire island center, simply disappearing into earth as geological forces reshape landscape in minutes. Minoan sacred mountain, center of island landmark that defined this place. Gone, replaced by void that sea will flood to create famous Santorini caldera. You realize that even if you survive, world you're sailing toward won't be same one you left. Eruptions' effects extend to civilizations that weren't directly Minoan. Egypt will experience climate effects from volcanic aerosols, possible crop failures, and disruption of trade with Aegean. Hittite Empire in Anatolia will be affected by ashfall and economic consequences. Emerging Mycenaean civilization on Greek mainland will face opportunities and challenges from Minoan decline. Entire Eastern Mediterranean Bronze Age system is being shocked by this geological catastrophe in ways that will influence historical developments for centuries. Some scholars in your time theorize that Thera eruption contributed to eventual Bronze Age collapse around 1200, and political instability created by volcanic catastrophe were contributing factors to systems collapse that ended Bronze Age civilizations and plunged Mediterranean into Dark Age. And personally, you're facing reality of being refugee in Bronze Age, assuming you survive long enough to reach land.
The ash-covered sea and floating death. Immediate tsunami danger has passed, but ship is now sailing through nightmare seascape transformed by eruption. Ocean surface is covered with thick layer of floating pumice, volcanic rock so full of gas bubbles that it floats, creating raft of rock that extends for miles in every direction. Ship is ploughing through pumice field, friction slowing progress and creating eerie scraping sounds as rock grinds against wooden hull. Floating among pumice are bodies, victims of eruption and tsunamis, both from your ship and from other vessels that didn't survive. Courses are covered in ash, making them look like grey statues floating in grey sea under ash-darkened sky. Some are recognizable as people from Akrotiri, possibly even family members or acquaintances who stayed behind. Visual horror of seeing familiar faces among dead is compounded by inability to retrieve bodies for proper burial, profound violation of religious and cultural obligations regarding treatment of deceased. Survivors on your ship are in various states of physical and psychological breakdown, injuries from being thrown around during waves, ash inhalation causing respiratory distress, burns from superheated steam that accompanied initial pyroclastic flow, and simple exhaustion and terror that have pushed people beyond their limit. Ship has become floating trauma ward, with Bronze Age medical capabilities, bandages made from torn clothing, herbal remedies of uncertain effectiveness, and mainly just trying to keep injured people comfortable, while hoping they heal, or at least don't suffer too much before they die. Ashfall continues intermittently, periods of heavy accumulation followed by relative clear periods, creating cycles of hope and despair as people think eruption might be ending only to have ash begin falling again. Each new ashfall requires renewed effort to clear deck, renewed reeving difficulties, and renewed fear that ship will be overwhelmed by accumulating volcanic material. Psychological toll of repeated stress cycles is breaking people's minds. Some have become catatonic, some are hysterically praying, some are helping with survival tasks in mechanical motions, while their eyes show they're no longer mentally present. Darkness persists. Massive eruption column is blocking sunlight across huge area, creating artificial night that makes navigation nearly impossible, and compounds psychological horror of situation. Without stars for navigation, without visual landmarks, Captain is essentially sailing blind, trying to maintain heading based on wave patterns, wind direction, and other subtle cues that require expert seamanship to interpret in normal conditions, and which might be completely unreliable in post-eruption chaos. Captain makes terrible announcement that he's not sure where ship is or which direction to sail, admitting navigational uncertainty that triggers new panic among passengers. Lost at sea in transformed Mediterranean, eruption has altered familiar seascapes so completely that normal navigation is impossible. Landmarks that coastal sailors use are obscured by ash clouds, stars are invisible behind volcanic aerosol, and even wind patterns are disrupted by massive atmospheric disturbance created by eruption column. Captain admits he's navigating essentially blind, hoping to encounter land or other ships that might provide orientation, but acknowledging that ship might be sailing in circles or heading toward open ocean, where supplies will run out before land is reached. Admission of navigational uncertainty triggers new panic among passengers who thought survival meant reaching safety but who now realize that escaping eruption might just mean dying slowly at sea. Despair is almost worse than acute terror of tsunamis. At least during waves there was immediate crisis requiring action, but now there's just slow recognition of possible doom without clear way to prevent it. You try to help with navigation using your modern knowledge of Mediterranean geography. You know roughly where Crete should be relative to Thera. You have vague understanding of dominant wind patterns, and you can make educated guesses about which direction offers best chance of reaching land. But your knowledge is theoretical and general, not detailed practical understanding that actual Bronze Age navigation requires. You're essentially another confused voice adding to uncertainty rather than providing confident guide. Then break appears in ash cloud, allowing glimpse of sun position. Brief solar visibility allows captain to establish rough bearing. Ship is heading approximately south-southwest, which means Crete might be achievable if ship can maintain that heading, and if distance isn't too great for remaining supply. Morale boost from knowing direction is immediate and profound. People who were descending into despair suddenly have hope again, and renewed sense of purpose allows reorganization of survival effort. Water rationing is implemented. Limited freshwater is distributed in tiny amounts calculated to keep people alive, but conscious that supplies might need to last many more days. Ash-contaminated water is only option, and people are advised to let ash particles settle before drinking to minimize ingestion of volcanic material. It's not safe by modern standards, but it's best available option in Bronze Age post-eruption condition. And while ship struggles toward uncertain salvation, you contemplate scope of what's been destroyed and what this means for future of Bronze Age world. Comprehending the catastrophe, civilization's death. As immediate survival crisis eases slightly and ship makes slow progress toward hopefully reachable Crete, you have time to contemplate full scope of catastrophe. City of Akrotiri is completely destroyed, buried under meters of pumice and ash, its buildings crushed, its people dead or scattered as refugees. Population you estimated at 15,000 to 1,000 is mostly gone. Some escaped on ships like yours, but many stayed and died, and some who evacuated probably didn't survive tsunamis and ash fall. But Akrotiri was just one city on Thera. There were other settlements on island, smaller villages, agricultural communities, fishing ports, religious sites, all experiencing same destruction. Total population of Thera might have been 30,000, 50,000 people, and survival rate is probably low, maybe 20 to 30% escaped in time, maybe fewer. Tens of thousands dead on island alone, their bodies buried under volcanic material where they'll remain for 3,600 years until archaeologists carefully excavate perfectly preserved ruin. Casualties extend far beyond Thera itself. Tsunamis will have struck Crete with devastating force, killing coastal populations who had no warning and no understanding of what was happening. Northern coast of Crete facing Thera probably experienced wave heights of 15 to 20 meters or more, enough to destroy Minoan port cities and coastal palaces. Death toll there might be in tens of thousands as well, concentrated in coastal settlements that were centers of Minoan power and culture. Ashfall extends hundreds of kilometers from Thera. Crete is covered in ash that will destroy crops, contaminate water supplies, damage buildings, and create public health crisis even in areas that survived tsunami. Eastern Mediterranean islands are experiencing varying degrees of ash accumulation that will affect agriculture and habitability for seasons or years. Coastal regions of Anatolia, Levant, and possibly even Egypt are receiving ash fall that will have economic impacts even if amounts aren't enough to cause direct casualties. Economic destruction is perhaps even more significant than immediate deaths. Minoan trade network has been severely disrupted by loss of Thera as trading hub, by damage to Cretan ports and shipping, by destruction of ships and cargoes in harbors struck by tsunami, and by general chaos that will affect Mediterranean commerce for years. Bronze Age economy was interconnected. Disrupting Minoan trade affects Egyptian, Levantine, Anatolian and Greek mainland economies as well, creating cascading economic consequences that will destabilize entire Eastern Mediterranean region. This might be historical event that ended Minoan civilization's dominance, beginning of end for sophisticated culture you've witnessed.
First glimpse of Crete. The heartland survives, but scarred. After what feels like endless days at sea. Probably actually 2-3 days, but time is hard to track in ash-darkened conditions. Land is spotted, coast of Crete emerging from haze like miracle of salvation. Ship limps toward shore, its crew exhausted, its passengers in various states of physical and psychological damage, but alive against odds that seemed impossible during tsunami impacts. But Crete is clearly not unscathed.
As ship approaches northern coast, damage from tsunamis is visible everywhere. Coastal settlements are partially destroyed, with buildings collapsed or damaged by wave impacts. Debris scattered across landscape, and general appearance of coastline that's been violently assaulted by sea. Bodies are visible on beaches, ships are wrecked on shore, or broken against rocks, and coastal populations who survived are dealing with their own catastrophe even as your ship arrives seeking refuge. Harbour at Knossos, or whatever port ship manages to reach, is damaged but still functional. Some quays are destroyed, some warehouses are collapsed, but basic infrastructure survived well enough to allow ships to dock. Your vessel joins other refugee ships from Thera and from Crete's own coastal areas, creating chaotic harbour scene where officials are overwhelmed trying to process survivors, provide aid, and maintain some semblance of order in aftermath of disaster. At least you're on land, solid ground that isn't heaving with waves or threatening to bury you in ash. Disembarkation is chaotic. Injured people need to be carried off. Exhausted survivors stumble onto dock. Children are crying and lost, and general confusion is compounded by officials trying to document who's arriving, where they're from, and what their status and needs are. Bronze Age bureaucracy that normally handles customs and trade is completely unprepared for mass refugee influx, and improvised response is barely adequate for scale of crisis. You're processed along with other survivors. Your name, Bronze Age identity you've been living under is recorded. Your origin from Thera is noted with sympathy and concern. Your injuries are assessed. You've somehow survived relatively intact, compared to many others, and you're directed toward temporary shelter where refugees are being housed. Efficiency is remarkable given circumstances, demonstrating organizational capabilities of Minoan civilization, even in crisis. But it's also clear that resources are strained and that hospitality won't be unlimited. Temporary shelter is large public building converted to refugee housing, crowded with survivors from multiple communities. Families huddle together with whatever possessions they manage to save, counting the missing, who survived and who didn't. Among refugees, there's desperate searching for family members, friends, and acquaintances who might have survived on other ships or through other escape routes. People are calling out names, describing lost relatives, asking if anyone has seen specific individuals. Reunions when people find surviving family members are joyous but also heartbreaking because joy is mixed with grief for those who didn't make it. Your own family status is unclear. Some members were on your ship and survived journey. Others stayed in Akrotiri and are almost certainly dead. And some might have evacuated on other ships that you haven't found yet. Uncertainty is agonizing. Are they dead, alive on other ships, injured or lost at sea? Without modern communication or efficient information systems, you might never know with certainty what happened to everyone, living rest of your Bronze Age life with unresolved grief and uncertainty about loved ones. Survivor guilt is crushing. You escaped because you had modern knowledge of what was coming, because you could warn people even if imperfectly, because you had advantages that others lacked. Family members who stayed in Akrotiri because you couldn't convince them to leave. People on ships that sank while yours survived. Residents of Crete who died in tsunamis that you knew were coming but couldn't warn them about. All their deaths feel partially your responsibility even though intellectually you know you couldn't have saved everyone. But you also recognize that you helped save people who did listen to your warnings. Your ship survived partly because of your knowledge. Captain took your advice about wave preparation. People evacuated earlier because of your passionate warnings, and general awareness you created that disaster was imminent. Probably saved lives that would have been lost to complacency. You can't save everyone, and you can't prevent geological catastrophes, but you did make difference for some people, and perhaps that's all anyone can do in face of forces beyond human control. Cretan officials dealing with refugee crisis are remarkably organized and humane. Food is being distributed, though supplies are limited by agricultural damage from ash fall. Medical care is being provided to injured survivors, and there's genuine effort to help refugees rather than treating them as burdens or security threats. Minoan cultural values that emphasize community, hospitality, and social responsibility are evident even in crisis, demonstrating civilization's sophisticated social organization. But long-term prospects for refugees are uncertain, and you realize you'll need to rebuild entire life in world forever changed by catastrophe. Refugee life. Starting over in Bronze Age crisis, immediate survival needs are being met, but longer-term question of what refugees will do is unclear. Most people from Thera have lost everything. Homes, possessions, livelihoods, social positions. Everything that defined their lives is buried under volcanic ash on island that no longer exists as they knew it. Rebuilding is impossible. Thera is uninhabitable and will remain so for decades or longer.
And even when resettlement eventually occurs, it will be starting from scratch rather than recovering what was lost. Integration into Cretan society is only option, but it's complicated by social structures, economic limitations and practical challenges of absorbing thousands of refugees into communities that are themselves dealing with tsunami damage and economic disruption. Some refugees have skills that are valuable and will find work. Artisans, sailors, traders, scribes can potentially integrate into Cretan economy. Others, especially those whose wealth was based on property and fixed assets, now destroyed, face uncertain futures with diminished social status and economic prospect. Your own situation is particularly strange. You have Bronze Age identity you've been living under, but you lack deep social connections, family networks and accumulated relationships that Bronze Age people depend on for security and opportunity. You're an outsider even among refugees, someone whose behavior and knowledge mark you as different in ways that might be opportunities or liabilities depending on how Cretan society responds to your strangeness. Trauma is visible everywhere. Children who watch their parents die, parents who lost children, survivors who witnessed horrors that will haunt them forever, and general psychological damage of experiencing catastrophic disaster without mental health support systems that modern societies would provide. Bronze Age people are resilient in ways modern people often aren't, adapted to higher levels of hardship and death, but even they have limits, and Thera eruption has pushed many survivors beyond those limits into lasting psychological damage. And while you're processing personal survival, broader implications of catastrophe are becoming clear as Minoan civilization begins its slow decline from which it will never fully recover.
Minoan power wanes. The beginning of the end. Over following days and weeks, as you recover and begin attempting to build some kind of life in refugee conditions, broader impacts of eruption become evident. Minoan power is clearly diminished. Loss of Thera, damage to Crete, disruption of trade networks, and general crisis have weakened civilization's dominant position in Eastern Mediterranean. Other powers are responding to vacuum. Mycenaean Greeks are expanding their influence. Egyptian trade is seeking new partners, and political landscape is shifting in ways that will eventually displace Minoan hegemony. Economic consequences are severe. Ashfall has destroyed Crete's agricultural productivity for current season, and probably several following seasons, creating food shortages that require imports and trade to prevent famine. Destruction of ships and port facilities has reduced Crete's naval capacity and trade capabilities. Loss of Thera as trading hub has disrupted established commercial routes and relationships. General economic shock is pushing Minoan civilization toward decline that might not be immediately fatal, but which represents beginning of end for their dominance. Religious and cultural impacts are equally significant. Catastrophe is being interpreted through Minoan religious frameworks as divine punishment, cosmic disorder, or spiritual crisis requiring major religious responses. You witness elaborate ceremonies, sacrifices, and ritual activities as Minoans try to restore right relationship with their gods and cosmic order. Religious explanations don't satisfy your modern scientific understanding, but you recognize that spiritual interpretations serve important psychological and social functions in helping people process trauma and maintain social cohesion. But you also see resilience and adaptation that gives some hope for Minoan civilization's survival. Minoans are responding to crisis with organizational capabilities and cultural values that made them successful in first place. Communal support for refugees, collective effort to rebuild damaged infrastructure, diplomatic and trade initiatives to manage economic consequences, and general determination to recover and adapt. Civilization won't return to its peak, and historical forces set in motion by eruption will eventually lead to Minoan decline, but immediate response demonstrates sophisticated crisis management that prevents complete collapse. Innovations are emerging from necessity, new agricultural techniques to deal with ash-contaminated soil, modified building designs incorporating lessons from tsunami and earthquake damage, alternative trade routes and partners replacing disrupted networks, and social adaptations to integrate refugee populations. Crisis is driving change that might actually strengthen some aspects of Minoan society even as other aspects decline. You find yourself contributing to recovery efforts, your modern knowledge providing useful insights when carefully applied and explained in ways Bronze Age people can understand. Living with foreknowledge. The curse of knowing. You know things about future that no one around you can understand or would believe. You know that Minoan civilization will eventually decline and be absorbed by Mycenaean Greeks. You know that Bronze Age itself will collapse in few centuries. You know that sophisticated cultures you're living among will be replaced by simpler societies and dark ages before classical civilizations. Living with this knowledge while being unable to change it or even fully explain it is psychologically isolating in ways that compound trauma of eruption you survive. Temptation to share future knowledge is constant. You could warn about coming Bronze Age collapse. You could try to preserve cultural knowledge that will be lost. You could attempt to change history by sharing modern insight. But you also recognize dangers. Changing history might create paradoxes if you believe in that kind of time travel logic. Revealing too much future knowledge would mark you as insane or possessed. And practical limitations of Bronze Age technology and culture mean that most modern knowledge isn't actually applicable or useful even if people believed you. Isolation of being permanently displaced in time is profound. You're only person in this entire Bronze Age world who remembers modern era, who knows what civilizations will rise and fall, who understands vast sweep of history that hasn't happened yet. Everyone you can talk to lives entirely in present, without your perspective on how temporary and fragile their civilizations are, without your knowledge of disasters and developments that await. You're permanently alone in your temporal knowledge, unable to share it or use it effectively. Possibility that you'll spend rest of your life in Bronze Age, dying centuries before your original birth, never returning to modern world you remember, is becoming more real as days pass without any sign of how to get home. Adaptation to Bronze Age life is progressing. You're learning to function in Minoan society, picking up cultural knowledge and skills you initially lacked, building relationships and finding purposes that make daily life bearable. But there's always awareness that this isn't your real life, that you don't belong here, that somewhere somewhen there's modern world that you're separated from by dreams are becoming increasingly vivid and strange, memories of modern life mixing with Bronze Age experiences, visions of future history you know will unfold, and surreal combinations that leave you unsure what's memory and what's imagination. Finding purpose in impossible circumstances. You begin channeling your knowledge and visions into constructive purposes. You become known as someone with unusual insights, possibly divinely inspired, who can provide advice on building, agriculture, navigation and other practical matters. Modern knowledge you possess, when carefully translated into Bronze Age applications, proves useful enough that people seek your counsel, giving you social purpose and status that make life bearable. Role of oracle or wise person fits you well. It allows you to share some modern knowledge without having to fully explain its sources. It provides social function that integrates you into Minoan society, and it channels your temporal displacement into purposes that help others rather than just isolating you in private madness. You're not claiming to be divine or supernatural, just someone who has insights that sometimes prove useful, and that modest claim is acceptable within Minoan cultural framework. You find yourself particularly drawn to trying to preserve knowledge that you know will be lost. You work with scribes to record oral traditions. You encourage artistic documentation of cultural practices. You help design archives and storage systems that might allow some linear A texts to survive in conditions where archaeological preservation is possible. You can't save Minoan civilization from eventual decline, but perhaps you can leave evidence that will help future archaeologists understand what was lost. Decision crystallizes about whether to try to change history. You adopt conservative approach of preserving knowledge, helping individuals, but not trying to fundamentally alter historical trajectory. Your goal becomes to live as good Bronze Age life as possible, while leaving subtle evidence and knowledge that might benefit future generations without dramatically altering history. Work to help Thera refugees integrate successfully, to support Minoan recovery efforts, to preserve cultural knowledge through documentation and teaching, and to generally make positive small-scale contributions that help people without trying to redirect entire flow of history. Acceptance of your limitations is psychologically liberating. You're not responsible for saving Minoan civilization, preventing Bronze Age collapse or altering course of human history. You're just one displaced person trying to survive and perhaps help others in small ways while waiting to see if you'll ever return to your own time or if you'll live out your days in Bronze Age as strange person with sometimes useful insights and possibly divine vision. As months pass, you begin to adapt to Bronze Age life in ways you didn't expect, and marriage proposal arrives that forces decision about committing fully to this timeline. Learning to belong in ancient world. Refugee camps and temporary shelters gradually give way to more permanent housing. As Minoan society absorbs Thera survivors, you're assigned living quarters in modest building, given work responsibilities that utilize your knowledge and skills, and generally integrated into Cretan social and economic systems. Process isn't seamless. There's discrimination against refugees, economic competition with established residents, and ongoing trauma affecting everyone. But Minoan cultural values of hospitality and community support make integration possible, where it might fail, in less cohesive societies. Your work as advisor and occasionally oracle provides livelihood and status. Officials consult you about building projects, merchants ask about trade possibilities, farmers seek advice on recovering from ash damage, and generally your reputation as someone with unusual but useful insights creates economic opportunities. Income isn't making you wealthy by Minoan standards, but it's adequate for comfortable survival and provides social position that makes you accepted rather than marginalized. Relationships are developing. You've formed friendships with other survivors who share trauma of eruption and understand losses in ways that Cretans who didn't experience Thera's destruction never fully can. You've established working relationships with Minoan officials, craftsmen and scholars who value your contribution. And gradually, social network that Bronze Age people depend on for security and opportunity is forming around you, creating web of reciprocal obligations and mutual support that make Bronze Age life viable. Marriage proposal arrives. Minoan woman, or man, depending on your gender and Bronze Age identity, whose family sees advantages in alliance with someone who has unusual status and potential, even if you're refugee without traditional wealth or lineage. Proposal is practical rather than romantic. Bronze Age marriages are about family alliances, economic partnerships and social connections, not necessarily about love, though love can develop. Your prospective partner is acceptable, not cruel or repulsive, reasonably attractive by standards you're learning, from decent family with some resources and status. Decision is agonizing. Accepting means committing to Bronze Age life, potentially having children who will be fully Bronze Age people, abandoning hope of returning to modernity, and fully integrating into civilization, you know is doomed to eventual decline. Refusing means remaining socially marginal, potentially insulting family that proposed with consequences for your social position, and explicitly choosing to remain psychologically separate from world you physically inhabit. You consult with Minoan friends and advisors you've developed. Their counsel is practical and assumes you'll accept because benefits clearly outweigh costs from Bronze Age perspective. They can't understand your hesitation, can't comprehend existential crisis of committing to timeline that isn't yours, can't grasp feeling of betraying your modern identity by fully becoming Bronze Age. Their incomprehension of your dilemma makes isolation of temporal displacement painfully clear. Yet you're beginning to care about Bronze Age life in ways you didn't expect. People around you aren't just historical figures or temporary companions. They're real individuals with lives, hopes, fears and value equal to anyone in modern era. Society you're part of, for all its limitations and differences from modernity, has genuine cultural richness, sophisticated social systems, and human warmth that makes it real civilization, rather than just primitive past. You accept marriage proposal, choosing life over historical detachment, committing to Bronze Age future even knowing what historical forces await. Marriage and building Bronze Age family. Marriage ceremony is elaborate and alien, religious rituals you don't fully understand, family negotiations about property and obligations, community celebrations that mark your full integration into Minoan society. Your spouse is patient with your awkwardness about protocols you don't know. Your family-in-law accepts your strangeness as quirks rather than fundamental flaws, and general social support for marriage makes transition easier than it might be. Intimate relationship with someone from Bronze Age is strange at first. Your spouse's worldview is so different from modern perspectives. Expectations about gender roles and marriage obligations are foreign to your modern sensibility, and cultural differences create friction and misunderstanding. But you're also discovering common human experiences that transcend time. Gradual building of affection and partnership, negotiations of compromise and accommodation that all marriages require, development of private jokes and shared references that create couple identity. Children arrive, and with them full recognition that you're creating Bronze Age people who will live and die in ancient times, who will never know modern world you came from, who will be fully part of civilization. You're studying like historical specimen. Parental love for Bronze Age children is identical to any parental love, and desire to protect them and give them good lives becomes motivation for deeper integration and investment in Minoan society's success. You teach your children things that other Minoan children don't hear. Tales of flying machines, distant future kingdoms, gods who live in sky, astronauts, and magic devices, technology that seem like mythology but which you present with unusual conviction. Stories might be dismissed as creative fables, or they might plant seeds of imagination and questioning that make your children think differently than their peers. Linear literacy you teach them includes subtle hints for future archaeologists. You encourage particular writing styles, introduce minor script variations that might help code breakers,
and embed information in seemingly innocent texts that might aid decipherment thousands of years in future. It's long shot, and you're not even sure texts will survive, but attempt to help future scholars feels important, even if its success is unlikely. Decades pass. You grow old in Minoan Crete, watching history unfold around you, seeing gradual decline of Minoan power that you knew was coming. Growing old and leaving legacy in wrong time. Your children have children, grandchildren, who are fully Minoan with just slight genetic contribution from whatever modern DNA you possess. Family you've created extends into Minoan society, creating connections and relationships that make you truly part of this civilization, rather than just visitor or observer. Roots you've grown in Bronze Age soil are deep and real, regardless of how you arrive. Reputation you've built as wise person or oracle solidifies. People come to you for advice. Officials consult you about important decisions, and your opinion carries weight in community matters. Social status isn't based on modern knowledge anymore. It's based on decades of living successfully in Minoan society, making good decisions, and earning respect through Bronze Age achievements. You've become genuinely Bronze Age rather than just pretending. But you've never forgotten your modern origin, and knowledge weighs on you as death approaches. As you age and health declines in typical Bronze Age pattern, you'll probably die in your 50s or 60s if you're lucky, maybe younger if Bronze Age hazards catch up with you. You face paradox of dying thousands of years before you were born. Philosophical and existential implications are profound. What happens to your modern self if you die in Bronze Age? Minoan beliefs about afterlife offer some comfort. They have sophisticated spiritual concepts about death not being end, about souls continuing in transformed states, about reunion with ancestors and gods in divine realm. You don't necessarily believe their theology, but psychological support of religious frameworks around death is valuable regardless of their objective truth. In your final years you create what you hope will be time capsule, sealed container with objects and documents you hope will survive archaeologically,
creating evidence for future discovery. You create time capsule with careful planning, sealed container with objects and documents you hope will survive archaeologically, and provide evidence of your temporal displacement. Contents include linear A texts with subtle hints about your modern origin, encoded in ways that might be recognized by future scholars as anomalous, objects that are slightly anachronistic or unusual for Bronze Age context, potentially recognizable as out-of-place artifacts. Artistic depictions include subtle modern elements, maybe fresco with airplane-like shapes and decorative borders, or pottery with suspicious technological motifs. Astronomical and mathematical notations demonstrate knowledge beyond Bronze Age capabilities, but which might be dismissed as lucky guesses. You're creating puzzle for future archaeologists, breadcrumbs that might lead them to understand that someone from future lived in Bronze Age. Time capsule is buried in location you hope will be excavated, perhaps near known Minoan sites that you remember from modern archaeology, in conditions that might allow preservation with markers that might draw future archaeological attention. Chances of success are tiny. Bronze Age materials rarely survive. Archaeological preservation is unpredictable, and even if found, your evidence might be misinterpreted or dismissed. One passage in Linear A texts reads roughly as, "I lived when I should not have lived, loved people who died 3,600 years before I was born, created family who are my ancestors though I remember future where they are ancient history." If you read this, know that time is stranger than your science imagines, that history is written by those who lived it in ways you cannot see, and that past and future are not as separate as you believe. You reflect on what experience has taught you, about history, about humanity, about yourself and about nature of time and civilization. History is real people with lives as meaningful and complex as anyone in modern era. Civilizations are fragile and can be devastated by forces beyond their control. Knowledge is contextual and requires appropriate frameworks to be valuable. Adaptation is possible even in impossible situations. Some mysteries should remain unsolved. With these reflections you prepare for death in Bronze Age, millennia before you were born, surrounded by Bronze Age family having lived life that's both impossible and entirely real. Final words and ancient death. Your children and grandchildren will mourn you with Minoan rituals. They'll bury you according to Minoan customs. They'll perform ceremonies that honor death, and they'll remember you as beloved family member who had strange stories and unusual knowledge but who was fundamentally one of them. Your Bronze Age identity will be complete in death, even as your modern identity remains unresolved paradox. As death approaches, you wonder about paradoxes. Will your modern life become impossible, never happening? Or are you just living strange parallel existence that doesn't affect timeline where you were originally born? Questions will die unanswered with you, and perhaps that's appropriate. Not all mysteries need resolution. You've learned that civilizations are temporary, that knowledge can be lost, that human connections transcend time, and that past peoples were as sophisticated and capable as modern humans. You've witnessed Atlantis, not Plato's philosophical allegory, but real Bronze Age civilization destroyed by geological catastrophe that inspired legends for millennia. Minoan civilization survived Thera eruption historically. Crete continued to be inhabited. Minoan culture persisted for centuries afterward, but it was never same. Destruction of Thera, damage to Crete, economic disruption, and psychological trauma weakened Minoan power so significantly that it could never fully recover. Within century or two, Mycenaean Greeks from mainland will be dominating Crete. Minoan culture will be absorbed or displaced. This is potentially an event that inspired Plato's Atlantis story through cultural memory of advanced island civilization destroyed in single day by fire and flood, sinking into sea caldera formation, creating that exact image, and leaving only legends behind. Atlantis wasn't just allegory, it was distorted cultural memory of Minoan Thera. You close your eyes for final time. Bronze Age person who remembers future, time traveler who became part of history, witness to Atlantis who carries truth that future generations will debate as myth. The legacy left behind. Your descendants will carry on in Minoan Crete, fully integrated into society. Your strange stories becoming family legends that gradually distort over generations. Some of your knowledge, agricultural techniques, building improvements, preserved documents will benefit Minoan recovery efforts, and might subtly influence historical development in ways impossible to trace. Time capsule, you buried weights in volcanic ash and earth, surviving or not surviving depending on geological and archaeological fortune. If found, it will create controversy. Impossible message written in authenticated Bronze Age script, anomalous knowledge that shouldn't exist, evidence suggesting time travel or unknown Bronze Age genius. Your life in Bronze Age, if it was real and not elaborate dream or vision, demonstrates that boundaries between past and future might be more permeable than conventional understanding allows. Whether through actual time travel, quantum possibilities, or human imagination's ability to vividly experience other times, you've lived experience that challenges understanding of temporal causality. And perhaps most importantly, you've proven that person from modern era could survive in Bronze Age, could adapt to radically different circumstances, could build meaningful life and make positive contributions even when displaced by thousands of years. Human adaptability, resilience and capacity for connection transcend time itself. Your story becomes part of history, buried in ash, waiting for discovery. Modern-day Santorini. Finding evidence. Scene shifts to modern day. Archaeological team is working at a crotiri, carefully excavating perfectly preserved Minoan city buried under volcanic ash. Since 16, preservation is remarkable. Entire buildings with frescoes intact, pottery in place, even organic materials surviving in ash that protected them from decay. Excavation is providing unprecedented insights into Minoan civilization at its peak. And then they find something anomalous. Sealed container in location that draws attention because of unusual markers, preserved by lucky chance in conditions that protected it from complete destruction. Contents are strange, linear A texts that seem unusual even to experts, objects that don't quite fit Bronze Age patterns, artistic depictions with elements that seem anachronistic, and what appears to be deliberate attempt to communicate with future discovery. Archaeological team is puzzled. Artifacts are clearly Bronze Age in origin, confirmed by dating and context, but some elements are difficult to explain within normal understanding of Minoan culture. Linear A texts contain patterns that seem deliberately encoded, almost as if someone was trying to provide translation hints to future readers. Astronomical notations show knowledge that seems advanced for period. One archaeologist specializing in Bronze Age linguistics notices something extraordinary. Linear A texts, when analyzed with new computational approaches and unusual patterns as potential keys, suddenly begin making sense. Language structure becomes clearer, phonetic values emerge, and meanings start crystallizing from what was previously indecipherable script. Breakthrough comes from following hints embedded in anomalous text. As linear A texts are deciphered using keys from time capsule, narrative emerges that seems like science fiction but which is written in authenticated Bronze Age script on verified ancient material. Story describes someone from future arriving in 1600 BCE, experiencing Thera eruption, surviving as refugee, and building life in Minoan civilization while trying to leave evidence for future discovery. Archaeological team is divided. Some insist texts must be forgeries, Others argue that materials are definitively Bronze Age and couldn't have been forged. Kill sign, scientific debate and DNA evidence. Text includes details that couldn't have been known to Bronze Age people, descriptions of eruptions mechanism in geological terms that wouldn't be understood for thousands of years, predictions about Minoan decline that proved accurate references to future historical events, and basic outline of world history from Bronze Age to modern times. Information is specific enough to be verifiable against historical record, yet written in authenticated ancient script. Human remains are found in burial near time capsule location, individual interred with honors, suggesting importance, surrounded by objects linking them to anomalous texts. Skeleton shows Bronze Age characteristics but also some unusual features. DNA analysis shows Bronze Age Mediterranean ancestry as expected, but with some unusual markers that don't quite fit expected pattern. More intriguingly, DNA contains what appear to be very recent mutations, genetic changes that shouldn't exist in Bronze Age populations because they evolved more recently in human history. Geneticists are puzzled. DNA is simultaneously ancient, confirmed by degradation patterns and contextual dating, and contains modern elements, specific alleles that shouldn't appear until much later. One geneticist proposes radical theory. If someone from future traveled to past and had children, those children would carry DNA from both Bronze Age parent and time-traveling parent. Offspring would have primarily Bronze Age genetics from one parent, but unusual modern markers from other parents. Over generations, modern markers would dilute, but might remain detectable as anomalies in ancient DNA analysis. DNA findings, combined with linear A texts, anomalous artifacts, and overall pattern of evidence, create compelling case that something extraordinary happened in Bronze Age therapy. Whether it was time travel, unknown Bronze Age capabilities, or elaborate deception by unknown parties, remains debated, but possibility that someone from modern era actually lived through their eruption and left evidence for future discovery becomes harder to dismiss completely. Media coverage erupts time travel as message found in Bronze Age ruins. Debate becomes international sensation. The message decoded, truth or myth. Personal sections of texts describe emotional journey, terror of eruption, grief of losing family members, struggle to adapt to Bronze Age life, eventual acceptance and integration, family created across time, and final hope that this message would somehow reach future readers. Humanity in writing is undeniable. This isn't dry historical record or impersonal data, but rather deeply personal account of someone living through impossible circumstances. Scientific community erupts in controversy. Find is too significant to ignore, too anomalous to easily accept, and too well documented to dismiss without investigation. Materials scientists verify artifacts are authentically Bronze Age. Linguistic experts confirm linear A characteristics are consistent with other known examples. Historians check factual claims against established chronology. Verification results are disturbing. Every testable aspect confirms Bronze Age authenticity except for content which describes impossible knowledge. Materials date correctly, script is genuine, context is appropriate, preservation matches expected patterns for Thera ash burial. There's no evidence of modern forgery or tampering, no anachronistic materials or techniques, but content remains impossible. Time travel violates everything known about physics, causality and nature of time. Narrative describes events that couldn't have been known in 1600 BCE, demonstrates knowledge that develops thousands of years later, and presents personal story of temporal displacement that has no place in rational historical understanding. Alternative explanations are proposed, perhaps unknown Bronze Age genius made lucky predictions, perhaps astronomical knowledge came from now lost sophisticated observations, perhaps modern elements are coincidental patterns over-interpreted by excited research, but each alternative explanation has weaknesses, and pattern of evidence consistently points towards something extraordinary. Whether time travel was real or not, one thing becomes clear: Atlantis legend was based on real catastrophe, real civilization, real people who experienced apocalyptic destruction. Plato's story and historical reality. Plato's Atlantis story, written around 360 BCE, describes advanced island civilization destroyed by gods in single day and night, disappearing beneath waves. For thousands of years, people have debated whether Atlantis was real place, philosophical allegory, or pure fiction. Archaeological evidence from Thera suggests answer. It's cultural memory of real catastrophe, distorted through centuries of oral tradition before Plato recorded it. Minoan Thera matches Atlantis description in crucial ways. Advanced civilization, with sophisticated architecture, engineering, culture, island location in sea, destruction in catastrophic event involving fire and flood. Disappearance beneath waves. Caldera formation literally made islands sink into sea. Differences exist. Plato's timeline is wrong. Location details don't match exactly. Some cultural elements are invented or confused. But core story of advanced island civilization destroyed catastrophically is historically accurate. Fairy eruption around 1600 BCE was one of largest volcanic events in human history. VAI-7 eruption equivalent to hundreds of nuclear weapons, creating tsunamis that devastated Mediterranean coastlines, causing climate effects across hemisphere, and destroying heart of Minoan civilization. Event was so catastrophic that it entered cultural memory of multiple civilizations, eventually being filtered through Egyptian sources, who experienced tsunamis and ashfall, and Greek traditions before Plato wrote his version. Time capsule evidence, if authentic, adds extraordinary dimension, suggestion that someone with modern knowledge actually witnessed event and tried to leave message for future. Whether this represents actual time travel, unknown phenomenon, or elaborate mystery, it connects modern understanding with ancient catastrophe in unprecedented way. Atlantis is real, not as Plato described it, but as Bronze Age civilization destroyed by geological forces, leaving legends that persisted for millennia. What we learn from lost civilizations. Discovery teaches profound lessons about civilizations, knowledge, and human experience across time. Civilizations are fragile. Minoans built sophisticated society over thousands of years, and were devastated in days by geological forces they couldn't predict or prevent. Modern civilization is equally vulnerable to catastrophes we might not anticipate. Past was more advanced than we imagine. Stereotypical primitive ancient people is myth. Minoans had sophisticated culture, advanced engineering, rich artistic traditions, and complex social organization. Every era of human history had intelligent, capable people building meaningful lives and impressive civilizations with available resources and knowledge. Knowledge can be lost. Linear A script remains largely undeciphered, despite time capsule architectural techniques, artistic methods, religious beliefs, and accumulated wisdom of Minoan civilization were largely lost when civilization declined. Modern society should consider what knowledge we're creating that might be lost if our civilization faces catastrophic disruption. Human connections transcend time. Whether time capsule story is real or imagined, relationships formed across millennia, family create and emotional experiences described in texts remind us that people in all times and places are fundamentally human, with same emotional capacities and needs for connection. Time might be stranger than we think, whether through actual time travel, quantum possibilities, or human imagination. Boundaries between past and present might be more permeable than conventional understanding allows. The final mystery: dream, reality, or both. Archaeological evidence exists. Time capsule is real. DNA anomalies are documented, linear A translations are verified, but interpretation remains contested. Did someone from future actually travel to Bronze Age? Did Bronze Age genius create elaborate hoax that survived millennia? Is there unknown phenomenon that explains evidence without requiring time travel? Perhaps question of whether it was real time travel misses point. Cultural memory of catastrophe is real. Archaeological evidence of destruction is real. Human experiences of trauma and loss were real for thousands who died and thousands who survived as refugees. Whether one person among them had temporal displacement adds mystery, but doesn't change historical reality of catastrophe. Atlantis serves as warning about civilization's fragility, reminder that advanced societies have risen and fallen throughout human history, and inspiration to wonder about what else from past might have been lost or misunderstood. Literal Atlantis might be myth, but truth behind myth is historical fact being discovered through archaeology and analysis. And you reading this story, are you in modern world, or did you never leave Bronze? Are you archaeologists studying ancient catastrophe, or are you still planning time capsule that future generations will find? Boundaries between dream and reality, between past and future, are less clear than they should be. Civilization fragility in modern warnings. Their eruption demonstrates how quickly advanced societies can be devastated. Minoans woke to normal day in paradise, and went to bed if they survived, as refugees watching world destroyed. Reminder that everything can change catastrophically with little warning is both terrifying and valuable. It encourages appreciating present, maintaining perspective on what's truly important, and recognizing that stability we take for granted is always more fragile than we believe. Modern civilization faces different but equally serious threats: climate change, pandemics, technological disasters, natural catastrophes, or combinations of factors that could disrupt our complex systems as completely as volcanic eruption disrupted Bronze Age Mediterranean. Learning from past catastrophes means taking warnings seriously, preparing for worst while hoping for best, and building resilience into our social and technological systems. Knowledge preservation is crucial. Linear A remains partially undecipherable because civilization that used it declined before knowledge could be transferred to successor cultures. Modern digital knowledge is equally vulnerable. How much of our accumulated understanding would survive if electrical grids failed permanently? What would future archaeologists make of our civilization if they found only scattered hard drives and corroded servers? But resilience is also a human trait. Survivors of Thera catastrophe rebuilt lives. Minoan civilization adapted and continued for centuries, and human knowledge eventually recovered and advanced beyond what was lost. Understanding time and history differently. Time capsule evidence, whether representing actual time travel or elaborate mystery, suggests we should think about relationship between past and future differently. History isn't just dead past to be studied, it's lived experience of real people, whose lives were as meaningful and complex as ours, whose civilizations were as sophisticated within their contexts as ours is within our context. Past peoples weren't primitive versions of modern humans waiting to evolve into us. They were fully capable humans working with available knowledge and technology to build successful civilization. Respecting past means recognizing their achievements, understanding their knowledge systems on their own terms, and learning from their successes and failures rather than condescending to them as inferior. Future is equally deserving of consideration. Decisions we make now affect people who will live centuries or millennia from now, just as decisions of Bronze Age peoples affect us today. Climate we alter, knowledge we preserve or lose, civilizations we build or destroy, all have implications that extend far beyond our lifetimes into futures we can barely imagine. Atlantis' story, whether myth or memory, serves as bridge between past and future, reminding us that human experience transcends individual moments and that our actions ripple across time. Personal meaning. What would you imagine yourself in time traveler's position, waking in Bronze Age with modern knowledge, witnessing catastrophe you know is coming, trying to save people who can't understand your warnings? Would you try harder to convince people? Would you focus on saving yourself? Would you use modern knowledge to gain power and influence? Or would you try to preserve knowledge for future? Reflection on these questions reveals our values and priorities. Do we value individual survival over community welfare? Would we try to change history if we could? How do we balance knowledge and humility, certainty and doubt, personal needs and social obligation? Time travel scenario is thought experiment about responsibility. If you had knowledge that could help others but communicating it required them to trust you without proof, how would you approach that challenge? Bronze Age people facing volcanic eruption, a metaphor for modern challenges where experts have knowledge about threats, climate change, pandemics, technological risks that require public trust and action despite uncertainty. Perhaps most important lesson is that every civilization thinks it's permanent. Every generation assumes its knowledge and systems will endure, but history shows that change is only constant. Evidence summary and final assessment. Archaeological evidence is clear. Advanced Bronze Age civilization on Thera was destroyed by catastrophic volcanic eruption around 1600. Minoan culture was sophisticated. Their destruction was complete, and cultural memory of event persisted for millennia. This is historical fact, not speculation or myth. Plato's Atlantis story matches this catastrophe in essential elements while differing in details, suggesting his account was based on distorted cultural memory of real event rather than pure invention. Egyptian sources that Plato claimed to draw from would have experienced tsunamis and climate effects from Thera eruption, making it plausible that they preserved memories of catastrophe. Time capsule evidence adds extraordinary dimension, but remains controversial. Physical artifacts are authenticated as Bronze Age. DNA shows unusual patterns. Linear A translations reveal impossible knowledge. Whether this represents time travel, unknown phenomenon, or mystery we haven't solved doesn't change historical reality of catastrophe, but it adds layer of intrigue to how we understand past. Final answer to was Atlantis real? Yes and no. Plato's specific story is myth, but it's based on real catastrophe that destroyed real civilization, making Atlantis simultaneously legend and historical memory. The mystery that remains. Some questions will never be fully answered. Did time travel really exist? If so, how did temporal displacement occur? What happened to modern consciousness if person died in Bronze Age? Are there other instances of temporal anomalies that we haven't recognized? Does time work differently than our physics currently understand? Perhaps these mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. They inspire wonder, encourage questioning, and remind us that reality might be stranger than our current understanding allows. Science advances by acknowledging what we don't know and investigating mysteries with open minds, while maintaining skeptical rigor. Atlantis serves multiple purposes: historical lesson about civilization fragility, archaeological mystery driving continued research, philosophical thought experiment about knowledge and power, and cultural touchstone that connects modern world with ancient catastrophe through persistent legend. Whether time travel was real or not, whether archaeological evidence represents impossible truth or elaborate mystery, Atlantis has fulfilled its purpose, making us think about past, present, and future in ways that enrich our understanding of human experience across time. Final reflection: what Atlantis means today. Atlantis is real in ways that matter most, as reminder that civilizations fall, as warning about nature's power, as celebration of human achievement and resilience, as mystery that connects us with past through wonder and investigation. Physical location matters less than lessons learned and inspiration derived from story that has captivated humanity for millennia. Modern world faces its own potential catastrophes. Will future generations speak of us as we speak of Atlantis? Will our civilization be reduced to legends and archaeological mysteries? Or will we learn from past, build more resilient systems, and ensure our knowledge and achievements survive for future benefit? Atlantis teaches us to appreciate what we have while we have it, to respect civilizations that came before us, to prepare for catastrophes we hope won't occur, and to wonder about mysteries that remind us reality is stranger and more beautiful than we can fully comprehend. And suddenly you're awake, back in your modern bed, phone showing was it dream, time travel, vision? The sulfur smell lingers, tsunami terror remains vivid, Bronze Age faces still haunt you. Then you see the news. Archaeological breakthrough: time capsule found in Santorini reveals impossible message. Your hands tremble reading it. Describes exactly what you remember creating in Bronze Age Thera. DNA evidence, linear A texts, impossible knowledge, all real. Dream or reality? You'll never know for certain. But Atlantis was real. It was Minoan Thera, destroyed in 1600 BCE by volcanic apocalypse, inspiring legends for millennia. And somewhere between myth and history, between dream and memory, between past and future, your story waits buried in volcanic ash. So hey, still awake? Drop a comment. Could you survive 48 hours before Atlantis sank? What would you do differently? Would you try to save everyone or just yourself? Hit like if this story made you see ancient myths differently. Subscribe for more time-traveling historical chaos that blurs reality and legend. And share with someone who needs to know. Atlantis was real, just not how Plato described it. Sweet dreams, time travel. Maybe check tomorrow's news. You never know what archaeologists might discover next. And remember, civilizations fall, knowledge is lost, but human spirit endures across millennia. Appreciate what you have, respect what came before, and wonder about mysteries that make reality stranger than fiction.